century will evolve. And when the equivalent debate took place at the end of the Second World War about the Cold War and the long historic clash between the United States of America and the Soviet Union, it was a debate reserved for a small handful of policymakers and politicians around Washington and in the chancelleries of Europe. The vast bulk of the public found out events only after the course of history had been set. And I think the whole world needs to be engaged in debating what sort of world we want to see and live in. And whether, as Wes Huntington said, there is inevitably a clash of civilizations coming. He wrote that seminal essay a couple of years after the end of the Cold War, at a time when others were saying we were in the end of history. He actually had a quite jarring and discordant note. And if you go back to reread that, whilst this debate about the clash of civilizations now inevitably seems to be polarised between the West and Islam, his was a broader analysis saying there is a clash between the West on one hand and rival civilizations, and he chose both Islam and what he called Confucianism. Effectively, most people would say China, which is a lot easier and quicker. I remember thinking at the time, if you want a clash of civilization, taking on 2/3 of the rest of the world is most probably not a good idea. They're bad odds to start with. But I also think it's a completely false choice. We didn't know over the last few days what would have happened in the Big Brother house. And whilst this is trivial and execrably bad television, I think it's been absolutely revealing about a transformation in British society. If that programme and that vote had happened 30 years ago, I think the result would have been very different. People would not have been rejecting Jay Goody and the others in the House. They would have been laughing along with them. And this 82% vote, which is effectively a rejection of bigotry and ignorance, I think is a brilliant signal to the rest of the world about the sort of society Britain is becoming, one that is tolerant. And what I suppose we haven't fully taken on board is that everything that was happening there and which we were watching on our televisions was being watched instantaneously around the rest of the world. In India, which is the second biggest source of inward investment to this city, with tens of thousands of jobs dependent on it. If that vote had been different last night, I suspect I would have been having to get on a plane to go and actually repair some of the damage and actually make it absolutely clear that I don't often get clapped when I'm announcing I'm going on a foreign visit. We'd love to have you on the London Assembly. The perspectives that are before us, I think, are quite clear. I believe that the sort of world that's emerging, one in which everything is known instantaneously, in which the things that people use, the films they watch, are gradually becoming truly global, is one in which people have the choice to select for themselves what they find attractive in all cultures, and therefore, rather than a clash of cultures and civilizations, I think we are at the beginning of a genuine global civilization emerging. Not one in which any one culture is predominant, but which ordinary people in their billions, by the economic choices they make, will validate what they find attractive in cultures across the world. I went to Singapore, as you know, for the International Olympic Committee vote. I found a completely different culture, but much in it in terms of the cleanliness of society, the lack of crime, infinitely attractive, and I would have thought people around the world would have found that infinitely attractive. It's very much a product of a very different culture and civilization. The cultural debate, which has been, I think, very badly handled in this country over the last year, this idea where we've been told that multiculturalism is not the way forward, that it's ridiculous to treat all norms, cultural norms, as equally valid. No one believes that. Nobody who believes in a multicultural society believes all cultural norms are equally valid. Female genital mutilation is not valid and should not be allowed. Hey, taken to its most ridiculous extreme, you would come to the point of saying cannibalism is a valid lifestyle choice. That is not the case. But in the emerging global society, the billions will decide what they find best and what will actually spread. The position, I think, oddly enough, is typified by something written by John Stuart Mill centuries ago. And it actually, I think, is still a very good guide for how we should conduct ourselves and organise ourselves within nations and between nations. And it was basically that you should live your life as you choose to do so, as long as you don't harm others. And if I read the exact form of words he chose, I think they're a very good guide for what happens within nations and between nations today. He said, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilised community against his will is to prevent harm to others." Or we might say he or she these days, but then we couldn't have been expected to anticipate quite the range of changes that have happened in our society. That's still a very good guide. And that is a very different situation, and it's a classic liberal prescription from the classic conservative prescription, that there has to be a requirement for a common ideology. Whether what form that takes, it's different in each society, but what we're really saying is you don't have to be Christian, you don't have to be Muslim, you don't have to be a monarchist or a Republican, you don't have to be British, or you don't have to be French, as long as you leave others to lead their life as they choose. As long as you obey the law, you should be free to live your life as you choose. And to impose on a people an enforced acceptance of any of those strictures, a Christian code or a Muslim code, is fundamentally wrong. That is a deeply conservative and authoritarian position. And it is one that cannot possibly survive in a world that is becoming as open as ours. We need to be able to freely choose. And in a situation where the expansion of choice is accelerating so rapidly, that's even more dramatically obvious. Now, a lot of people find this difficult to come to terms with because they assume their culture is inherently superior. I debated with Muslims about the caliphate in an almost exclusively Muslim audience, with people arguing the caliphate would be a superior form of global organisation to that which we have. But you also get similar absolutist positions, not offensively put, cropping up in every culture. I think only of Max Hastings, who used to edit the Evening Standard, where he wrote that in studying, there's no point in studying anything except European-derived literature or culture. Now, Max is going to get a tremendous shock when confronted by the cultural richness of China or India or the Muslim world. And that's not an attitude that is only about our literary and cultural legacy of the past. Asian film today is the most advanced of any in the genre. It powers Western products in film. George Lucas himself has said that he could not have made Star Wars without Kurosawa's work preceding him. Not everyone would have seen the similarity between Kurosawa and Star Wars, but it is this interchange now, this movement backwards and forwards of what is best in different cultures that is so important. And if you go on to the streets of a modern world city, whether that's London, excuse me, or New York, or Shanghai, or Mumbai, you will see young people on the streets using the same technology and sharing the same concerns. I don't find that particularly new or surprising. As a young man, I crossed the Sahara Desert and spent time with the Tuareg communities. 20 years ago, after Mrs. Thatcher abolished the GRC and I was unemployed for a year, I took the time to go up through Nepal to Everest Base Camp and saw there amongst the Nepalese community a society very little changed in over 100 years. Wherever you go in the world, broadly people are driven by the same things. They want security for themselves and their families.